Okay, I think I am live. Let me check. I believe I am. It says we're good. All right. Looks like we're good. Apologies if there's a odd silence there for a little bit. Anyways, today we're gonna go through functions in Python. Some things that we're gonna cover. I'm just gonna copy paste these questions here. Let's put a text cell in. I don't know if I need to explain why functions are important in Python, but they are for a lot of reasons. Just trash this cell real quick. All right, so today I'm just going to cover like what is a function in Python. It's really easy to understand a function by its parts. So just going through the different parts of a function, how to define a function in Python, and by define it I mean like give it a name, create it so you can use it, call a function, and call a function really just means to actually run it, to execute it, to use it, and then how to determine and assign the output of a function. So all of these are pretty fundamental. So let's go ahead and say, what is a function? So a function in Python is anything that, so like for instance, there's some, let's see, types of functions. There are some functions that in Python are, I forget the word, it's not inherited, it's, they come just built into Python. I'll just put it that way, built-in Python functions. So, example, the string functions. And this just is like a placeholder for any function. So let's say I have a variable. This is my string. I can go string dot capitalize, and it'll actually run this function, and it'll capitalize my string. So string dot capitalize is a function that's built into Python. It's native. There we go. To Python. Yeah, and but this is all a function is, right? You can put something in it, you can call it, then it like outputs something. So what are the parts of a function? Well, whenever we're defining a function, so we'll say, let's say I want a function that just says like adds exclamation point to a string. Maybe I pass in a string, and then I want to say new string equals string plus exclamation point, return new string. Cool. So I've written a function. Let's go over its parts. So def means define in Python. So this is actually the line of code that tells Python, hey, when you see me type in adds exclamation point, you're going to recognize that that's a function because of this def keyword. So we have def for define. We have inputs or keyword arguments, and those go in the parentheses, so this is where that is. And then we have the body of the function, this is the docstring of the function, below is the body of the function. So, whoops, did not mean to hit enter. So I'll put that there. Docstring, optional. You can add some documentation about your function. It's really helpful to have docstrings on all your functions, so people who didn't build it can read it. And then the body. So this would be our body here. So this is the body. Def name inputs. So def name of our function. In fact, we should put that comes after def comes immediately after def. Inputs go in the parentheses. We have our body here, and then this is our return statement. So after our body, this is what holds stuff to do, optional, and then return, also optional. You don't always have to have a return value in a function. That's like the cool part about them. You can, you don't have to. Most functions do, some don't. But yeah, this is a function. So this function has been defined. I've run it, which just means I can actually like use it now. I could say adds exclamation point, and I can put in a string. So let's say string equals. This is a new string. Boom. And it will return this with an exclamation point at the end. And that's it. So we have a function, we have its parts, but really like what's going on here, right? There's some tricky things with functions. I think people see them and they start using them, but they may not really fully understand what's going on. So I pass in a string. Do I have to call this string? No, I can call this anything. And I like to name my parameters here, or my inputs, so that way I can reference it whenever I call my function. So this is a function call. Function call always have parentheses. So this is really important. Like, let me just type in adds exclamation point. Notice if I do this in Python without the parentheses, what does it say? Well, Python's going to tell me what that is. It's going to say, hey, this is a function called adds exclamation point. Python's telling me that, but I haven't called it. Now I'm going to call it, and Python says, hey, you actually have a positional argument in here called string right there, and you're not passing it in. So to call it, so I called it, but I didn't call it correctly. I need to say string equals. Here is my string. I need to give it a string, and then Python will run it successfully. So this is a function. It works well. I've called it. In fact, if I type it in Python, Python will say, hey, this is a function type. So some things I think people get confused are like, they think the body and the return value are linked. They think if I do something in the body, the return value will reflect what I've done to the body. And that is not true. The return value is literally whatever you return. So let's get my function again. So I'm going to change it. I'm going to put 2. So I pass in a string. That string goes here. I add an exclamation point to it, and I assign it to a value called new string. And I'm going to go ahead and print new string so you can see it. And I'm going to return 2. In fact, I'm not going to print it. I'm just going to leave it there. So if I do add exclamation point, string equals, this is a different function now. It returns 2. Why? Well, because I told it to, right? Return is what dictates what your function outputs. People often use the word output like they use the word print, and they're not the same word in code. Maybe colloquially they're the same, right? Oh, I printed this, or I outputted this, right? They seem the same because a print is a form of an output. It's called a standard out, but they're not the same. So like terms, output, the output of a function as determined by return. Go ahead and put these in some code brackets. Print is a standard out. Standard output which means it prints to the console, but it's not the return of a function. It's just a print statement. And I think those are like really important to understand those distinctions. Print and return, not the same. Print and output, not the same. Output and standard output, related, but not the same. And like making sure you understand that really empowers you to understand what you're doing with functions and make functions work the way you want them to. That's the whole point, right? In code, you want to learn it so you can control it and get it to do what you want. So some function, let's say I just give it a variable AA, XX, BB. Let's say I put in 3 variables here, right? And I say y equals AA plus 2 times XX plus BB. Okay. And then I return 10. Well, if I say AA equals 1, XX equals 0, BB equals 10, what am I going to get? I'm going to get 10 because I returned 10, right? That's what your return statement does. Whatever you put on your return, that's what you're going to get out here. So let's do this. Let's just create a variable called P. Let's assign it to this right here. Now, what do we think P equals after running some function of 1, 0, and 10? What's P going to equal? P equals 10. Why does it equal 10? Well, it equals 10 because when I call a function, it's going to return a value, in this case 10, and it gets assigned to the variable, in this case P. So P is going to equal that return statement, which is why it's 10. Okay. So why is that important? Well, because sometimes you want your functions to do some stuff, but maybe you want it to return true or false, right? Maybe you want your function to return a specific date on the calendar given some parameters. So understanding where the return is going to go, like in this case, return went to P. I assigned it to P. In this case, it didn't go anywhere because I didn't assign it to anything. There's no variable at the beginning. But that's just helpful to kind of help you debug your code, understand what you're doing, and give you more context around it. Now let's just talk about some... So this is like basic stuff. Let's talk about like basic plus stuff. So default... keyword arguments. So let's go back to my function, some function. Actually, let's not do that. Let's table that. Sorry, this is what I get for not planning. Let's modify the function to return y. So how can I take this function here, my sum function, and get it to return y? Well, I just have to say return y. Now, do I need to do this? No. This can also be written as the following. I can just take this, and instead of saying y equals, I can just get rid of the body and put this here, right? I'm just kind of taking an extra step by assigning it to y, but I don't need to assign it to y because I'm just doing this with these inputs. And that's it. So I can write this function in either way. So I'll say some function with body, some function without body. Both are going to return the same thing. So what's a default keyword argument? Well, a default keyword argument, so let's run one of our functions with no inputs. So if I go some function with body and I just run it, what happens? It errors out. Now, what does the error say? Notice this error. Missing 3 positional arguments. All right, whoop, I don't know why that didn't copy. Which means I have to actually pass in 3 values to call this function. Let's do it again. AA equals 10, XX equals 12, BB equals 3. And let's assign this to P. Let's just print P. 37, great. So if I don't pass something in, sorry, someone just rang my doorbell. So if I don't pass something in, it's going to error out. I have to pass in all 3. Well, what if that's annoying? What if I want X to just kind of be the same value every time, unless I want to change it, right? So let's rewrite this function. And instead of X, let's just choose, actually, no, let's choose X. Let's rewrite this function to allow us to modify XX, but by default, XX will equal 0. So let's do that. So I'm going to grab my function, grab it from up here, and here I'm just going to write XX equals 0. Now it's throwing an error. And what's it saying? Non-default argument follows a default argument. So in Python, this is called a default argument. And what that means is if I don't pass in XX, Python's just going to give it 0. It's going to say, hey, this equals 0. This is its default value. This is going to equal whatever I put here. In this case, it's 0. But default arguments always go last. So I have to go XX or AA, BB, XX. So still have my 3 arguments, but I have to put the default ones at the end. That's the only difference. So now let's do it again. Let's call this just like last time. And I still get 37. So what happens here? I take some function with the body. AA, I say equals 10. So it's going to go here. So it's going to go y equals 10 plus 2 times XX is 12. So it's not going to assign to 0 because I told it to equal 12. And it's going to plug it in where XX is. And BB equals 3, and BB is going to go right here. And that's how you get 37. Let's do the same thing, but this time remove XX. And what do we get? We get 13. Why? Well, I'm going to plug in AA equals 10. Plus, I didn't pass in X, so Python says, hey, it didn't error out, which means there has to be a default argument. We have a default argument of 0, so it's just going to go 2 times 0 plus BB, which is 3. So that's how I get 13. So these are default arguments, and default arguments are fantastic. In fact, if you want to have default arguments. Actually, it's so case by case. Sometimes you don't, right? Sometimes like let's say, you're writing a function where someone doesn't have to submit their birthday or where they live, but they need to at least submit like their name and email, right? Well, you would want to put like name, email, birthday is none, location is none. So you're telling Python, hey, if they don't submit this, just give it none value, give this a none value, but they have to submit these 2 things, right? Python won't allow this function to run unless they submit the name and email fields. So that's like a use case where like you can use these how you want, but to me, the most important thing is understanding what they do and then just putting them in whenever you need them. So I'm going to redefine my function, and I'm going to give all of them default values. I'm going to give AA default value of 1, 2, and XX gets 3. So now if I say P equals some function with body, what does P equal? Well, I'm not passing anything in for A, B, or X here. I'm just calling it. And before, when we called it, it gave us an error. Why? Because these are required positional arguments. Now, because they're default, are they still required? No, because I've given them a default. So it's telling Python, you don't need to pass these in to run this function now. You can just run it. You can run the function with whatever you have to pass in. In our case, we don't have to pass in anything. So we just plug in 1, 2, and 3, and that gives us 9. So what if I did this? What if I pass in 5? Well, I should get, like, what is it, 12? 13. Okay. 5 plus 2 times, oh, this is XX. My apologies. So 2 times 3 is 6. Yeah, 13. That makes sense. There you go. So just to recap, what did we learn? Learn that functions have parts, right? The parts are defined above. I'm not going to type them here. I will say def name. Actually, I guess I am typing them here. Doc string body return. Now what here is optional? Not optional, not optional. Input, actually optional. Your function doesn't have to have an input, believe it or not. Doc string is optional. Man, I should have just been a lot smarter about this. Let me just cut this, put this in a text cell. Def name input doc string body, and the body is also optional, and the return optional. Isn't that crazy? All these are optional, which to me is pretty nuts. So I can like literally just have like def simple func. Okay, maybe not everything is optional. Nothing here. I don't have to have a doc string. I don't have to have a body. I don't have to have a return. But if I run this, Python's going to say, hey, we need something here. So I can just put, so you do, I guess you have to have, you have to have something below the def line, but it doesn't have to be anything meaningful. So sometimes you can just use the word pass in Python, and pass just means like pass over this. Don't worry about it. There's a function, and I can go simple func. X equals simple func. Cool. So I pass in nothing. What does it return? Nothing, but Python can't return anything. So by default, it'll just say, hey, X equals none, right? Which is different than nothing in Python. None and nothing are different. Nothing means like it doesn't exist in memory. None, it exists in memory. The value is just none. It's a none type. So pass is another keyword. But yeah, so we went through that. Added default keyword arguments versus required keyword arguments. Make distinctions between functions and calling functions. So what do we do whenever we want to call a function? We use parentheses, right? And then use the pass keyword to do nothing. Cool. Hope this is helpful. I think some great functions you can make is like make a function that can calculate the area of a rectangle, make a function that can calculate the area of a circle, make a function that can calculate the perimeter of a circle. And from those, you got to figure out, okay, what are my inputs? What are my return values? What do I want to name it, etc. Those are some good basic assignments. I highly recommend you do them and put your code in the Discord channel. And thank you for watching. That is all. I'm going to go ahead and end the stream. Peace.